Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
I love that. That's beautiful. Really
There is so much energy in this room and so much energy in the group. It's very inspiring. That was an amazing day yesterday. Today's such an important day because we're trying to turn all that energy into some organized action, which, as many of you know, you've probably all been at exciting conferences and lots of ideas bubbling up, and maybe a few weeks later you wonder, what's come of all this? We're really trying to do everything we can today to make sure that something really does come of this. Some of us have been involved in exercises like this before, and perhaps it hasn't ended up as well as it could have. So it's serious work, and we're really going to try to keep on schedule and focus things. And as you're going through the morning, we're urging you to continue to think, is there a part of this strategy that you really would like to commit to doing something about? But I know there may be people in the room still wondering, not really sure. Maybe you don't know what part of the strategy. Maybe you're not sure of a role that you might be able to play. Please don't worry. Think about it. If you come to the end and perhaps would rather participate and learn a little bit more, there's room for everybody in this. You don't have to have a total focus on one thing. So please don't feel pressure around that. But on the other hand, there is a little bit of pressure for us to all get together, get to know each other even better, work together, and make change. So the first part is going to be ambitious because we're trying to report on yesterday's sessions, the high points, in 1 minute each. And the folks up here are tasked with that. In a couple of cases, they might have to come to the podium. So first, we're calling on Maureen Hahn to report on the business case session.
Thanks, Alec. So the business case session was excellent. And the three very high-level thoughts that we pulled away from that is that when a business becomes disability confident, the employees who are already working at the business or at the place of employment who have not disclosed in the past will feel safe to disclose. And that allows for adjustments and a healthier workforce with retained staff. And that was a very excellent and passionate point that came up yesterday. We also realized that we have to look at the talent and then decide the skills that are needed for the job and not look at the disability. It's not about the disability, it's about the talent that is being brought to the work. And the last piece was that successful businesses will shift to inclusion in order to survive the labor shortage. That if successful, that businesses that want to succeed, want to be around in the future, they have to realize that they need to diversify their labor force in order to succeed and to survive. Thank you.
So now we'll turn to the advocacy session. Steve Mattis will report.
Yeah, I got it. And here we go.
So we're not in competition, but I think the advocacy session was maybe the best one. And I'm not being objective, right? We're scientific. So how do we how do we advocate for stronger support to improve the level of employment for people with disabilities? You know, and this is going to lead into one of the sessions that we're having then later this morning. So we need to start by developing an engagement framework to facilitate the process. That we need the help and support of specific groups, community groups, advocacy groups, to take their individual skills to work together in order to develop that national partnership. We need to come as a coalition. All these things are all about finding ways to work together to use our skills in various ways towards the same end. And the fourth is, as a grassroots community come together, it's helpful to figure out what success looks like. We face so many challenges making change. We need to be able to mark where we're actually successful along the way to keep our energy and momentum up. And think about the government as a partner and not just as the target of our advocacy. that's another angle that, once again, we may have different tracks on that advocacy part, and one of them certainly is partnership.
Next, the session on unconscious bias, it will be Melissa Egan.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. The unconscious bias and stigma in the workplace session was full of excitement and so much conversation. So we had to pull a lot of information into a very small space. But what we came away with was that unconscious bias is very systemic in nature, and the individual training to build awareness isn't enough to address it. Actions needed. There are lots of action needed to address it at an organizational level as well as at a societal level. In order to address unconscious bias and stigma, what we need to do is start by recognizing it in ourselves. We heard some great personal stories from Marcy Vauteur and Tammy Yates to that end. What we need to also do is recognize and understand how unconscious bias works and the way that it harms people who are living with disabilities, and then work to address it at an organizational level. This is a process that takes time, and we need to allow space and time to develop awareness because unconscious bias and stigma are not always easily apparent. Some of the suggestions that came out of our group discussions included building awareness through introducing a reverse mentorship program. People with lived experiences mentoring managers on disability issues and ways that unconscious bias can be tackled in an organization, as well as leaders and managers acknowledge your own vulnerabilities, disclose things, talk to your staff, create conversation, and through that, culture change will begin to happen. Thank you.
Next is school to work transitions with Kathy Hawkins.
Nope, it's wrong.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I've been deputized. So there were a lot of ideas, many ideas that were exchanged in that session. We've tried to pull out three key things. Sorry, there we go. So the first one was the idea of providing more job placements, co-op opportunities for students with disabilities, even before post-secondary, so in high school as well as post-secondary. And of course, that means designing co-ops in a more inclusive way. That means the schools and the employers have to design co-ops in a more inclusive way to be able to make that happen. And there was, in fact, a broader point about inclusive design, that the inclusive design principles that we were talking about for workplaces also need to be applied to educational institutions. With the idea that what is essential for some is good for all, that inclusive design principles will benefit all students. For example, if there were plainer language curriculum materials, that was one idea, that specific idea came up in schools that would benefit all students. And a third idea was the idea of promoting self-efficacy, that while we need the educational institutions and employers to be active in developing a culture of inclusion and adopting inclusive design, we also want to give individuals with disabilities, young people with disabilities, the skills to advocate for themselves, for example. I think those were the key points. Thank you.
So the next is best practices in accommodation. This is Kathy Hawkins.
Morning, everybody. So you know we had a lively conversation about best practices and accommodations, and you know that we had some great conversations about, what we need to do in order to support individuals in the workplace. We came up with three really high-level points. IPS model, the individual placement and support model, that took a lot of time on our agenda. People were really keen to learn about that. And we thought that it should be implemented within the mental health services with partnerships with employment specialists. We felt after a very lengthy conversation about the WSIB system and how we need to work more with government and making sure that employers and WSIB all work together, we really felt that we need to address the systemic issues and change it both with the employer level and the SIB system. And then our last point was that the workplace and employers need to foster an environment of trust so that disclosure is only about functional limitations and accommodations for success and not about everything else. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kathy. The last session, and Emile will be presenting on, is about standards.
So the 3 points that we boiled it down to was workers' compensation boards can bring about awareness, deliver outreach, and serve as role models in the disability prevention arena. Workers' compensation was actually a very key group involved in the development of the standard we were talking about there, the Work Disability Management System standard. And so they can really be a role model. They play a key role in the service provision side of things, and so they can be real role models for this system, for management systems. The second point, which I will tell you in a second when I get it back on the screen. Let's stop having it in presentation mode. We'll just work it this way. Okay. It is important to foster a shared understanding and to bring in lived experience insights at the beginning of and throughout any process. And that was repeated, I guess, through all sessions that you guys have had here with us, is that lived experience brings such valuable insights. And we really can't say whether this is the best way to do things until we get a good sense of whether the people with lived experiences can really tell us this is going to work, because we know how the lay of the land works and whether these kinds of best practices are meaningful for our experiences. So same with these standards, we realized the importance of people with lived experiences in developing them and executing them. So the last point is focusing on fostering equitable and ethical recruitment, hiring, retention, emergency response, accommodation, performance management, and career development practices. So that's a mouthful, but it's really framing it as the life course perspective, really thinking about a person's career in the labor market from the first onboarding on a job right through to progression through the organization and exit from the labor market or exit from the employment relationship to another one. We really need to foster that idea that employers need to work with their workforce throughout their life in the labor market and not just at a point in time when a particular need arises, but think of it as a holistic framing of experiences of people in the labor market, more broadly speaking. And the standard tries to frame it that way as well. And we really emphasize the importance of having that in best practices in general. And that's our 3 points. Thank you.